I've been playing drums over 20 years. I've squished those 20 years into this video so you can get the same results in a fraction of the time. And I'll give you practical takeaways and exercises you can use right now that have helped me achieve my drumming goals faster now that I'm able to focus on practicing what actually matters while ignoring the rest. These are 4 things that will literally save you years of work if you apply them on the drums now. Let's start with, well, number 1.
And that is, you don't have to be good at everything. I've never once heard Bernard Purdie play on a metal tune. I've never heard Buddy Rich play funk.
I don't know. I don't care either.
And yes, those drummers probably could pull it off. But it's okay that they didn't.
Now it's time for you to listen. I want to.
You can dive into one thing on the drums and get really, 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 really good at it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Buddy Rich!
In fact, that's what I recommend you do. Get good at one beat. Absorb yourself in one style of music. Find out what makes you tick and what you love the most. Branch out from there, of course, but don't get tricked by the idea that you have to master absolutely everything. And that brings us to number 2. If you're like me, about once a month you hear somebody talking about pataflaflas, and you have to go Googling a rudiment chart on the internet. But here's the thing. You don't need to know all those rudiments. Or I should clarify this. You don't need to know all of those rudiments by name. You've probably looked down the list and you see, okay, 7-stroke roll, 8-stroke roll, 11-stroke roll. I have no idea what it is. If I do the math, I can imagine that it's 30-second notes fit into 5/16 notes worth of time plus an accent. So that's 10 plus 1, but really I'm making that up because I don't know it. But guess what? I know that I can play it and I'm sure that I have played it. But I think about double stroke rolls in a different set of terms than memorizing different categories on a chart. You really can simplify your conception of a double stroke roll and phrases that use them. So rather than thinking about memorizing every single one on that list, you can start to improvise, experiment, and be creative with where in a bar line you start your double stroke rolls and where you end them. And the same thing goes for flams and flam rudiments. Get creative with the ways you explore the variations and combinations of flams that you play. Experiment with where the flams are placed and what you do with them in all sorts of different ways. You don't have to restrict yourself to just what's on this chart. The possibilities in front of you are so much more than that. I want you to experiment with the rhythms, the patterns, the stickings that you play in ways that are musical rather than categorical, which brings us to number 3. Now this one is tough for a lot of drummers to accept, and that is that technique will take years to master. If you're new to certain fundamental techniques, for example, this open close technique that I teach for double stroke rolls, then you have to accept that it'll probably take you 6 months to a year of regular dedicated practice before you get this under your belt. I was lucky to be shown at an early age that if I sit down and work on one fundamental technique as slow as possible for as long as possible, then I'm properly taking the time to get every detail of those movements correct. When you start researching muscle memory and how to build good habits on any instrument, you'll find that the most important thing is that you should sound perfect when you practice. You should strive to have every stroke be perfectly placed, be completely consistent in the movements you make, the dynamics you play with. So give yourself time and be patient with yourself when you're working on these fundamental stroke types. Don't rush through what you're practicing, because at the same time that you're working on those techniques, you should be working on number 4. And that is, of course, the rhythmic checklist. So what is the rhythmic checklist? Well, it's the name that I've given to a very fundamental and old concept within music, and that is you can boil down 99% of the rhythms you're going to play down to this list. Now, this is an excerpt from my course, Rhythmic Freedom, and we're looking at the 16th note rhythmic checklist. What you're seeing is a list of every single combination of notes and rests within a set of 4 16th notes. So what do we do with this information? This is everything. The idea here is to deepen your internalization of these phrases and then find ways to transform them into an infinite number of possibilities. Well, you can do any number of things. You can accent the rhythms, you can flam the rhythms, you can buzz the rhythms, you can play them with your foot, you can play them with your... The creativity you gain from working on this tiny set of rhythms is vastly more exciting than if you spend your time learning every little fill and lick you hear in a drum solo, or every rudiment on the rudiment chart. Focusing in on a smaller set of fundamental principles, rhythms, techniques is going to get you so much further on the drums than trying to do too many things.
Now, I'm not going to explain this to you again.
The thing is, if you really want to take your drumming up another level, these ideas aren't enough on their own. There's actually another concept that you need to add to this, and I've found that without these practice frameworks, it's difficult to get your brain and limbs to really work together. That's why you need to watch this video here, because when you combine it with what you've just learned, the difference is remarkable. You're going to get your practice time 10 times as efficient or even more.